the other attendants went up to my teammates and said, "Can you guys put your mask on correctly?" Because it was slightly under the nose. So then they moved it up above their nose. And then a few seconds later, she came and she was like, "Get off." She pointed at me, Brian, and my other teammates, and she said, "Get off the plane right now." And she was like yelling at us. And it was just, we were just all confused. And then when we were about to get up, the people, the witnesses and stuff, they was like, "No, sit down because you guys have done nothing wrong. You guys can't, you can't do this because we're minors."
First of all, Barry, why don't you just set up for us what has happened here? Because I know that you have posted on social media what you're
Yeah.
calling a call to action
hmm
after this incident.
Well, the young men, five of them and three of them that are right here, they were racially profiled on Allegiant Airlines coming from, Arizona to Stockton, of young men playing basketball. They were in the airliner. They was told to put their mask up because one of them, some of them had their mask kind of down, like down towards their nose, and they applied. They complied to what the stewardess asked, and just the stewardess was giving them the understanding of why they need to do that and be cleared, and they properly said okay, and moved on with that. Where then another flight attendant came a few seconds later and just really digged into these young men and kind of pointed out all of them and said, all you guys are off. You guys got to go. You've been disruptive. You've been belligerent. You've been disrespectful. We've talked to you before. And this particular time, CJ, he was, listening to like some music, and he kind of took off his headphones, was like, well, what's going on right now? You know what I mean? In the sense of like, why are we getting kicked off the plane? And again, the unfortunately, the flight attendant was saying that because they've become unruly. And now this particular time, other folks on the airplane were saying, wait, what are you talking about? These kids are okay. They haven't done anything that exceeds them to be getting kicked off the airplane, excuse me. And then eventually police were called. They were told not to record or they would get arrested by one of the flight attendants, and four police officers basically hauled them off. They weren't aggressive, but it was a traumatic situation for them to see 4 to 5 police officers pull up and now are telling some young teenagers to get off the plane, as other passengers were telling them, don't go, get off because you didn't do anything wrong. And they were left stranded inside the airport, no money. Thank goodness some good stewards in the airplane gave them some money. But if that didn't happen, they were left with no money, no way to get home to Sacramento, and they were stranded in an airport that was already closing, and that was the last flight to come back home from Arizona to Stockton to get picked up by their family. So family was ready to go get them picked up in Stockton. This is, to me, an act of racial profiling. You have 6 foot something young black males. The stereotypes that I keep hearing is, we've talked to you before. Are you guys football players? All these different things. These young men have been going back and forth, doing the same exact thing from Arizona to Sacramento to play basketball. Good kids in my program. And I just know their character. And it's unfortunate that we're at this moment and this point right now, because even in this pandemic, you would hope and think that something like this could have been handled and solved a little bit better. Let's say if the young people may were talking a little bit louder. I don't think this calls for them to get kicked out, right? How are they supposed to survive if their family didn't have any money or access to get them back in a timely fashion? So they had to stay in Arizona for another day and then have to pay for another flight to get all of them back home.
Well, so Corey, David, and Brian, talk to me. Take me through, first of all, what you're thinking when you're told, get off the plane.
Honestly, when we were on the plane, they were saying get off. I wasn't the one she was telling, but I was really confused, to be honest, because I didn't know like what she was telling us to get off for. She said something about the whole disrespectful thing, like he was saying, but it was still really confusing because we were all like just sitting there, like not like minding our own business, talking back and forth through each other, not even anybody else that's on the plane, like besides our group of people.
And so, when this happens and but you go out there and police show up, what are you thinking?
when the police showed up, it was scary because I mean, with everything that's going on, I didn't know if I could have been killed or arrested. I didn't know what was going to happen to us. So it was traumatic.
Well, I can't imagine. I mean, the trauma that it must have been for you, especially when you're trying to figure out, well, what have we done that would merit, carloads of police pulling up to the plane and having you get off. What about then this notion that you are stuck there in Arizona? What were you thinking?
Well, we were all pretty scared. So the first thing we did was call our parents because we didn't know what was going on, and we didn't have anywhere to go if they kicked us off the planes, and because our coach had just dropped us off. So it was like a lot of scariness from our point of view, like to where what is going to happen with us involving the cops, or what are we going to do? What do we have to? How are we going to get home? A whole bunch of stuff. So basically, it was like a lot of trauma, and we were just straight up scared. I'm not even gonna lie because you never know what's gonna happen.
Well, talk to me about this. Help us. Take us back to what happened. Walk us through how it all unfolded.
Go ahead, start there. So it all unfolded when basically we got onto the plane, and then I had my foot in the aisle, and then she came and said, "Keep move your foot in." So I moved my foot in, and then next, someone went up to one of the other attendants went up to my teammates and said, "Can you guys put your mask on correctly?" Because it was slightly under the nose. So then they moved it up above their nose, and then a few seconds later, she came and she was like, "Get off." She pointed at me, Brian, and my other teammates, and she said, "Get off the plane right now." And she was like yelling at us, and it was just we were just all confused. And then when we were about to get up, the people, the witnesses and stuff, they was like, "No, sit down because you guys have done nothing wrong. You can't do this because we're minors."
Well,
Yes.
and that's the interesting thing, right? So literally, you're saying that this notion that you had your foot in the aisle and you put your foot back in, and you had the mask under your nose and you put the mask above your nose was enough for them to say, okay, you guys are being unruly and you need to get off the plane.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's enough. That's why well, I didn't think that's enough for us to get kicked off the plane. To be honest, in my point of view.
No way that's enough. That's crazy. I mean, you know how many people they say that to, right? There are people that refuse to wear the mask and then they get kicked off. They did not refuse to wear a mask and they weren't unruly. Do you know how many times I've had my feet somewhere or my seat wasn't up and they nicely just say, "Hey, Mr. Accius, pull your seat up." Okay. It's just, this is almost embarrassing that an airline and the flight attendants, especially the African American flight attendant that berated these young men, traumatized these young men, and didn't even look at the significance that these young men aren't from this area. It's not like they were from Arizona and they could go back home. They were coming from a whole different other state, and they were going to get stuck. And the airline did not even call their family, didn't even look at them as minors, just looked at them as objects and threw them outside to fend for themselves, and didn't even give them and offer them a refund. This is outlandish. It's ridiculous. There's no excuse that they can give unless these young men were attacking somebody on that airplane. Then there should have been some consequences that would have came out of that. But these are young men, good students, A+ students that have done this trip several different times. I think they had a mistaken identity, but I definitely know this was racial profiling, and they utilized a black woman to do the dirty work.
Well, I will say, Mike, I have to agree with Barry on many different levels. I know one of these young men here, his character far exceeds the picture that they tried to paint, and it's racial profiling because before they got on the plane, they were asked, "Are you guys a football team?" And let's not negate the information or the facts that a football team was taken off of this plane prior to them getting on a plane, and the players on this football team were African American males. And so when these tall African American men, these athletes, are being asked, "Are you a part of a football team?" they're telling you no, and you proceed to tell them, "Well, we look like we've dealt with you before." That's the first stage of racial profiling because it feeds into the stereotype that all black people look alike. And so when they're telling you, no, that is not us, it should have been left alone right then and there. So when the feet in the aisle, as Barry said, you're typically asked gently and left alone. To be asked to pull a mask up, you're typically asked and left alone. But these are different stages of antagonizing these young men who are sitting on the plane. You have evidence of the witnesses telling you that these young men are not doing anything wrong. And so the lady that they dealt with initially was not the black lady; it was a white stewardess.
So
And
talk to
so
me
why?
about this. This is good information that you're giving me. So what you're saying is,
Yeah.
you're saying before they got on the plane, that someone came up to them and said, "Hey, are you guys with a football team? Because we've had a football team that we had to, take off the plane." And so they were trying
Yes,
to
sir.
determine, were these some of the same folks trying to get back on?
Yes, sir. And obviously their word wasn't credible enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they're telling you, the original stewardess, who was a white woman, that we are not them, then you proceed to send the black stewardess. Now, why would you send a black stewardess? To prevent this from being a racial discrimination case, so that when you kick them off, it can be done in good measure because somebody who looks like them is kicking them off and they're going to just lay down and take it? No, that's not the case. They're still going to push the issue because at the end of the day, they are wrongfully being asked to get off of this plane. There was no confrontation. There was no altercation. Yet, although the police were not aggressive, how many times have we seen young black men comply and still end up dead? And so it's still traumatizing whether the police were aggressive or not, because you have multiple police. When many times when people are asked to cooperate and they don't cooperate, they're just asked to get off of the plane. They're not surrounded by security, not just security, but police officers. At that, these are minors being left in Arizona. So what then? When they're standing outside, these same group of belligerent boys are standing outside of the airport. That gives more police officers the opportunity to pull over and harass them furthermore.
So Corey, David, and Brian, talk to me. What would you want to say to the airlines? What would you asking for an apology? What would you want to hear from them? What are you wanting to get across?
I would have to ask them, like, what was their real point in taking us off the plane? I know it couldn't have been us. Like, I want them to be honest about their actual reason for taking us off the plane. Like, I couldn't have been just the mask, because you had people on the plane not wearing masks at all. You come to tell us we're just wearing underneath our nose. Like, what would be I would want them to tell us, like, what would be their real reason for taking us off the plane, instead of just making up a different excuse or telling people different things. Just telling us one thing and then making it different to something else, to someone else, my fault. And like, yeah.
Well, I mean, that certainly makes sense. So you're saying that there were people on that plane who were not wearing masks at all, who stayed on the plane?
There were people that had their masks like down here, or there were some people that have the mask like here, or like here, like I said here. There were some people that not have their mask on at all. It was just, yeah.
Wow. Wow. Well, I tell you what, this is just quite the story. You know, Barry, I see that you have kind of launched a social media campaign saying that folks need to take action, that now is the time for people to start making their voices heard.
Because too often I think that we have, Chris, that you have us fighting for young people that are already dead, right? These are young people that have done the right thing. They're being told, they have parents that are expected them to get on the airplane. I mean, here's the thing. If these kids were so bad and so unruly, why would their parents allow them to get on planes back and forth? This is not the first rodeo, right? And what the stewardess and the folks on that flight told the police officers that made the police officers come in such a force were that they were unruly and disruptive young men, black males. So the police officers are coming in and thinking they're dealing with some disgruntled young people, and they're looking at these guys like, why are we here? But because the flight attendants had already told them, these are the kids that we got to get rid of, they have no choice but to do their job, so allegedly. But what we have to understand, that every time there has been some confrontation with black males and police officers, it doesn't end up right on the side that it needs to be. So these are the kind of things that I don't think that these individuals were thinking about. Not only the simple fact, you're leaving a bunch of minors, 16 and 17-year-olds that don't live in that state, out left for nowhere. They're left stranded. You're flying and you're like, okay, well, we got rid of the problem. And people are saying, no, leave the kids there. That's frustrating, because if these were my sons, I would have probably flown back to Arizona and would have had a real situation with all those people that was, on that flight, that were flight attendants and, whoever, because I don't see how you could, with the decency, we're in a pandemic, leaving young men out there just to die and fend for themselves as if they were grown adults that had money. This is a catastrophe. This is way beyond disrespectful, and this is a significant thing that we have to call out. We can't sit back behind it. Just because no one got shot or killed, this still needs to be spoken upon, and the truth needs to be prevailed.
All right, well, I'll leave the final words with the young men then. I'll have you all leave us with what you would, if people don't take anything else away from this story, what would you want them to know?
Well, I want everybody to know that stuff like this that you see on the news, it's real, and us three, along with our teammates, have witnessed and been a part of it ourselves. So I just want everybody to know that maybe you look like me, maybe the same race as me, maybe you have the same hair as me, to be careful. Be careful what you say. Be careful your actions. We never know what it's going to turn out as.
Yeah, like you said, this is real life. This is no joke. We have to take this stuff seriously, and we have to have change. It just has to happen now.